Good morning, Abundant Life Church. This is Pastor Chris, and today we're going to be starting a new series. We're going to be looking at the Gospel of John. And we're going to start in John chapter 1, verses 1 through 18. And this is actually a passage about Christmas, believe it or not. And as we go through it, you're going to think, I don't see Christmas here, but it's there. All except for the part of the passage that isn't about Jesus coming and makes us wonder why it's in there. I was the first time Deb and I ever used GPS. This was years ago. It was before people had phones, and everybody has GPS on their phones now. Back in the day, you had to buy this little system, and we were going somewhere. I don't remember where, somewhere in Oregon, and some friends of ours loaned us their GPS system. Well, the problem with it was if you made a wrong turn, and we knew it was a wrong turn, but we're going, hey, there's a place to eat right there. And so we turned left instead of right. And all of a sudden, the GPS knew we turned wrong. I'm going beep, 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 these little beepy sounds. And then this voice came on and said, recalculating. We couldn't stop laughing because it felt like the voice was disappointed with us. So we kept making other wrong turns just to hear that again. Yeah, we eventually got lost. But here's the thing. Isn't GPS great? I so much prefer GPS to the old days when people would give you directions. Because you know how they would give you directions? Well, you're going to want to turn at the old Spencer Ranch. I want to turn at the old Spencer Ranch. Okay. So I'm looking for a ranch that looks like it was once owned by somebody named Spencer. Even worse are the people who say you're going to come to an intersection and there'll be a Shell station on the right and a Walgreens on the left. Don't turn there, just keep going straight. Okay. Why are you telling me where I shouldn't go? Just tell me where to turn. Don't tell me which is not the way. John begins his gospel by talking about Jesus as the Word of God and the light of the world. And then he very specifically starts talking about John the Baptist. And he says, John wasn't the Word. John wasn't the light. Okay, why bring that up at all? What's the point of telling us who wasn't the light? Do we really need that part to be included? Well, yes, we do, and for a really good reason. So let's start looking at this and realize that Jesus is many things that you're going to see throughout the gospel that John the Baptist simply wasn't. But is there anyone who wasn't aware of that? All right, let's look at verse 1 here, again, of John chapter 1. And it says, in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Word obviously refers to Jesus. Jesus was the one that God sent into the world. John was just there to point out to people. Now, what Jesus is called here is very significant. First, John calls him, as we see, the Word. And in the first century, some scholars thought the term God was too familiar. We're not worthy even to write his name. So instead of saying Moses went out to meet God, they would say Moses went out to meet the Word of God. Everyone knew that phrase. The Word meant God himself. So John here begins his gospel by openly saying Jesus is God himself. Now let's look at verses 2 and 3. For Christmas, I want a phone that doesn't turn off constantly. He was with God in the beginning. Through him, all things were made. Without him, nothing was made that had been made. John now declares that not only is Jesus God himself, he also is the agent of all creation. He made everything, and he's pre-existent. There wasn't a time when Jesus didn't exist. Even before he came as a baby, he existed. We don't exist before we were born. Jesus did. I'm not sure the right verb here. So he made everything, but he was never made. He exists above creation. Okay, Jesus is above all creation. That means all creation is subject to him, and that includes us too. This is pretty amazing stuff. Now, John calls him something else. He says, in him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. Verse 5, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Now he's called the light, and that light is going to defeat the darkness of sin. So who is Jesus? Well, he's God himself. He was sent to save us. This is all big stuff. Right up front, John wants us to see exactly who we're dealing with. He is the most important person ever. He's sent out on the biggest job of all time. Are you impressed yet? Because you should be. And then there's John. God sent John the Baptist for a very different but still important reason. Verses 6 through 8. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning the light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. Right? John is going to point out now, John the Baptist says, who Jesus is. That's his mission. Obviously, John was not as important or as great as Jesus. In fact, later on, we see John goes out of his way to mention, let me get the confusion here. John, the writer of this gospel, goes out of his way to mention that John the Baptist wasn't the light. Okay? Did anybody ever say he was? If you were to say, Babe Ruth was the greatest hitter of all time, and Bob Newhart never even made the pros. True, but what's that got to do with it? Why mention anyone else? If you want to say Babe Ruth is the greatest hitter of all time, that's enough on its own. If you want to tell us that Jesus is the light, Jesus is the Word, Jesus is God Himself, great. But why are you telling us John wasn't the light? None of us were the light. Only Jesus was. Doesn't this seem off? This is supposed to be an introduction to the most important man on the most important mission ever. So why even mention a character who is less than Jesus? Well, we're all less than Jesus. What's the point to that? Why did John, the writer of the gospel, do this? Well, tune in next time and we will find out. Until then, have a great day.